The hallway smelled of oil and dust, the kind of scent that never left the barracks no matter how much it was scrubbed. She walked down it with her sleeves rolled tight around her wrists, though the heat pressed against her skin like a furnace. Her boots echoed on the concrete floor, a steady rhythm that seemed to invite the whispers that followed. They always started soft, barely more than a hiss, before swelling into laughter. Each step she took was another spark, and before she reached the end of the hall it was a storm of muttered words and snickering. They called her names behind her back, said she was too weak, too broken, too scarred to wear the uniform. Some claimed she was an accident waiting to happen. Others said the only thing she had survived was her own clumsiness. She never turned her head, she never answered back. The scars on her arms and the faint ridges across her cheekbones spoke for her. Whether she wanted them to or not, they had been etched into her like cruel signatures carved by fire and steel. And because no one knew the truth of how she had earned them, they had turned her story into a joke, one she was forced to hear every single day. The mess hall was the worst place of all. The smell of reheated rations and metal trays clashing filled the air as she pushed the doors open. A burst of laughter greeted her before she had even stepped fully inside. It was always louder when she entered, as if her presence alone was the punchline. Soldiers leaned in at their tables, whispering behind their hands, eyes cutting toward her with poorly disguised smirks. One voice rose above the rest, saying something about her scars looking like a map leading nowhere. Another voice chimed in, asking if she had burnt herself just trying to light a stove. The laughter that followed was sharp enough to pierce through even the strongest armor. She gripped her tray so tight her knuckles whitened, but she did not stop. She kept her gaze locked straight ahead. Her steps were measured, her shoulders squared. The morning sun struck the training field with a merciless glare, turning every grain of dust into glittering shards of light. The recruits stood in perfect rows, boots sinking slightly into the soft earth. Rifles rested against their shoulders, glinting beneath the sun like teeth ready to bite. The instructor's voice cracked through the air, barking orders that carried across the yard. Each command was a hammer, and every soldier a nail, meant to strike in unison. She stood among them, her body rigid, her pulse steady, though inside she burned. The scars on her arms were hidden under rolled sleeves, but sweat traced their outlines until they shimmered like pale rivers. Someone behind her muttered her name, laced with mockery, and a ripple of laughter followed. It was quick, sharp, cruel, yet she did not break formation. Her jaw tightened, her hands curled tighter around the rifle stock. The drill surged forward, step after step in rhythm, heels striking the ground in thunderous beats. Arms swung, rifles clashed, the sound ringing like steel against stone. The instructor's commands came rapid, faster, harsher. Each soldier was pushed to the edge and beyond, yet she kept up, her body moving with mechanical precision, every muscle straining. Her breath rasped in her throat, but she refused to let it falter. The laughter quieted. Some of the recruits still sneered, still watched her, waiting for her to stumble, yet she did not stumble. Her stance was firm, her aim unshaken. She matched them stride for stride, her every movement exact, as if carved into her bones. The jeers that had cut through the field earlier began to fade, swallowed by the sharp crack of discipline. Still the shadows of ridicule lingered, waiting for weakness. One voice rose again, this time louder, a sneer aimed straight at her. It cut across the yard, and for a moment the laughter reignited like sparks in dry grass. She heard it all, felt it press against her back, but she forced her breathing steady, forced her arms to stay aligned. Her body became stone. Night wrapped the barracks in a restless silence, broken only by the hum of insects and the occasional clatter of boots on patrol. She lay on her cot, staring at the ceiling, her arms folded behind her head, but her mind far from the room. The scars burned faintly, as if remembering their birth, throbbing reminders of what she carried alone. She rolled onto her side, tracing them lightly with her fingertips, and wondered how long she could continue to hide their story. The laughter of the day still echoed in her ears, though the barracks had gone quiet. Some of the women whispered in low tones before sleep, others simply turned away, pretending she was not there. It was always easier to pretend. She pulled the blanket tighter around her body, but it did nothing to shield her from the memories pressing at the edges of her thoughts, memories she had buried so deep no one dared to look for them. She had never spoken of that night, not to the medics who patched her wounds, not to the officers who wrote the report, not even to the chaplain who stopped at her bed with kind eyes and quiet prayers. She had carried it alone, locked behind her ribs, with each scar serving as the key. If anyone knew the truth, if anyone discovered what had really happened, the weight would shift from her shoulders to theirs, and she was not sure they could bear it. The convoy had rolled out under a sky thick with clouds, headlights cutting thin beams through the darkness. The road wound like a vein through hostile land, their wheels crunching over gravel and dirt. She remembered the silence that hung between the hum of engines, the kind of silence that made every soldier tighten their grip on their weapon. She had been younger then, less hardened by ridicule, yet already cautious, already aware that silence in the wrong place was a warning. The explosion had come without mercy. A bloom of fire erupted ahead, shattering the night into chaos. Metal screamed as trucks tore apart, the shockwave slamming her against steel. She remembered the sky that morning was the color of steel, clouds stretching low as if pressing down on the earth. The recruits gathered on the field, boots stomping into rows, rifles clutched at their sides. Dust rose in light swirls carried by the breeze, yet none of it distracted from the atmosphere already charged with unease. Something was different today, though no one said it aloud. She felt it before she saw it. The stillness among the instructors, the tightness in their shoulders told her enough. Every recruit stiffened instinctively as a figure stepped forward across the yard. He was tall, his presence filling the air before his voice did. His uniform was cut sharp, his cap angled low, yet his face unmistakable. The general. The air shifted at once. Soldiers who had laughed and whispered the day before now froze, their smirks wiped clean as if erased by the very sight of him. Even the instructors fell silent, their commands dying on their tongues. His boots struck the ground, slow, deliberate, each step echoing against the weight of silence. He carried no weapon, yet the authority that followed him was heavier than steel. Her throat tightened, though she forced her posture straight. Her hands curled slightly against her rifle, the scars hidden beneath fabric prickling, as though they knew something she did not. She had seen officers before, captains, majors, even colonels, but never him, not in person, not the man who could bend entire regiments with a single word. His eyes scanned the field with sharp precision, moving over the lines of soldiers, as if weighing each one, measuring their worth. When they reached her, she felt her chest lock, her breath caught, but she did not let it show, not in her stance, not in her face. Still his gaze lingered longer than she expected, not a glance, but a steady, deliberate hold. She swallowed hard, though her throat felt raw. For a fleeting moment she wondered if he could see past the scars, past the silence, into the night of fire and steel. When she should have died, she wondered if he. Whispers filled the barracks long before the sun had set. They moved like smoke, curling through every corridor, slipping between bunks and over trays in the mess hall. Soldiers spoke in hushed tones, yet their voices carried enough to find her ears, always just loud enough to sting. The general's visit had shaken them more than any drill could. He was not a man who appeared without reason, not one to waste his time on routine inspections, and the way his gaze had lingered on her, the way his pores had hung heavy in the silence of the yard, it had not gone unnoticed, not by anyone. Why her? Why would a man of his rank spare a moment for someone they mocked, someone they dismissed as nothing but scarred and clumsy? They did not laugh as loudly now. Their jokes had thinned, replaced by speculation, muttered questions traded like contraband in the dark. She felt the change every step she took through the compound. It was no longer the sharp sting of open ridicule, it was the press of eyes against her back, the weight of curiosity laced with unease. They still sneered, some of them, but it was different. Their smirks wavered quickly, their voices dropped the moment she turned her head. It was not kindness, it was fear. At dinner she sat at her usual place at the edge of the hall, but instead of cruel laughter the room shifted into a silence so heavy it threatened to crush her. She heard the scrape of trays, the coughs quickly stifled the rustle of uniforms, but no one dared speak openly, not with the general's shadow still hanging over them. She forced herself to eat, though every bite tasted of iron and ash. The scars along her arms itched beneath her sleeves as if they knew what she did not. She kept her eyes down, but her ears caught everything. A group at the far table whispered her name, their words broken by the clink of cutlery. Another pair glanced at her, and then leaned close, speaking too soft to catch, yet their faces told her enough. They were no longer laughing, they were calculating. By the time the mess hall was louder than usual that evening, yet the noise carried a strange edge to it, not quite natural, not quite careless. Soldiers spoke with forced energy, their laughter sharp but hollow, as though each voice was trying to cover the weight of something heavier she felt at the moment she stepped through the door. Her boots echoed on the linoleum floor, her tray balanced in her hands, the smell of rations clung thick in the air. But the taste of food was the last thing on her mind. The atmosphere shifted around her like a tide. The usual jeers did not come. Instead, conversations dipped into silence as she passed. A dozen sets of eyes lifted to watch her, then quickly darted away, pretending interest in trays and cups. She had grown used to their cruelty, but this silence was worse. Silence meant danger. It meant knowledge had shifted hands, and she no longer knew who. She kept her face forward, her steps steady, the tray gripped so tightly her knuckles ached. At the far end of the hall, the commanding instructor sat with two junior officers. Their table was not normally placed there, but tonight it had been drawn into the open, not against the wall, but in full view. A mistake or deliberate, she could not tell. On the table lay a document, thick parchment folded neatly and sealed with wax pressed into the mark of the general. The sight struck her harder than any whispered insult. The insignia was unmistakable, bold and unforgiving. It gleamed under the fluorescent light like an accusation. She froze for half a second, her tray trembling, before she forced herself to move again. She sat at her usual spot near the edge of the room, but her eyes kept sliding back toward that seal. The instructor broke the wax with trembling hands. The crack of the seal echoed across the room, sharper than any laugh had ever been. He unfolded the pages, his eyes scanning quickly, his jaw tightened, his throat worked in a swallow. He looked up instinctively, and his gaze landed on her for just a moment. Sweat dotted his F.